In today's story, Karen, the self-proclaimed HOA enforcer, takes things too far when she decides to cut down a neighbor's beloved oak tree. What starts as an overreach ends in disaster when one of the tree's branches falls onto a Lamborghini, causing massive damage. The resulting consequences are a courtroom battle, financial restitution, and Karen's ultimate downfall. Before we dive in, I'd really appreciate it if you could take just a second to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to me and keeps me going to create more stories like this one. Now, let's jump into the story. The sun was barely up, casting a soft glow over Maple Estates, a charming suburban neighborhood. It was one of those mornings when the scent of freshly cut grass and the chirping of birds filled the air, making everything feel peaceful. My house, nestled just 3 doors down from Karen Simmons, was always my sanctuary. The lush green lawn and the century-old oak tree in my backyard had been my pride and joy. That oak tree was a symbol of everything I loved about my home. It offered shade in the summer, shelter for birds, and a sense of calm whenever I needed it. But today was different. I noticed Karen walking down the street with her clipboard, her face twisted into a determined frown. She marched with an air of authority, as if she owned every inch of Maple Estates. Karen wasn't just another HOA member, she had managed to worm her way into a position of power, unofficially taking control of the neighborhood's rules. As she passed my house, she stopped and glanced up at the oak tree. It was like she was calculating its every branch, as though it posed a threat to the entire neighborhood. I knew something was coming. Sure enough, the next morning, a letter arrived. It was from the HOA, but it was signed by Karen herself. The letter was an official violation notice, stating that my oak tree was in violation of some absurd bylaw, something about trees over 35 feet being hazardous. I was taken aback. I had read the HOA rules thoroughly when I moved in, and there was no such rule. This was Karen's attempt to impose her will on me, determined to not let this pass. I stepped outside that afternoon, only to find Karen standing in front of my tree, arms crossed, eyeing it like a judge ready to pass sentence. "Is there a problem, Karen?" I asked, my voice steady. But beneath the calm surface, a storm was brewing. "Oh, Michael," she said with a forced smile, "this tree is a liability. It's too tall. If a storm hits, it could fall and cause serious damage. We can't have that in the neighborhood." She seemed so certain, so smug in her stance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I knew she had an issue with my tree, but I had no idea it was this personal. "Karen?" I responded, my voice cold. "If this tree were to fall, it wouldn't even come close to your property. It's not your concern." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, flipping through her clipboard, as if searching for the next piece of ammunition. "Well, it drops leaves in my yard every fall," she said. "That's already a problem." I rolled my eyes, fighting the urge to snap. "That's what trees do, Karen." But it was clear this was no simple complaint. This was her power play. "As an HOA board member," she continued, "I'm telling you it needs to come down. If you don't remove it within 14 days, you'll face a fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not happening," I said, standing firm. This was the beginning of a fight I hadn't planned for, but I was ready. Karen wasn't about to take my tree from me, and she wasn't about to make me bend to her will. It was a Tuesday morning. And the day had started off like any other, calm. Peaceful. With the sun shining brightly overhead. But that peace was shattered by a sound that made my blood run cold, the unmistakable hum of a chainsaw. I rushed to the window. Heart racing. And what I saw froze me in place. Karen was in my yard. Standing beneath my prized oak tree. Her eyes narrowed with determination. She had no permission to be there. But it didn't seem to matter to her. The chainsaw was revving loudly as she hacked at the thick branches. Taking aim at the tree's strong limbs like a soldier on a mission. She was relentless. Chopping away without a care in the world. I couldn't believe it. Karen? The so-called self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood rules. Had taken matters into her own hands, again. This was no longer about the tree being a hazard or a liability. No. This was about her controlling everything around her. Including my property. Karen, I yelled. Rushing out the door. My voice tight with fury. What the hell are you doing? She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to me with that infuriating, fake smile plastered on her face. Michael. Don't worry. I'm just handling this for you. You'll thank me later, she said. As though she was doing me a favor. I was livid. You don't have the right to be here. Get off my property now. But she just shook her head and continued to saw away at the tree. Oblivious to the damage she was causing. And that's when it happened. As she cut through one of the larger branches. The chainsaw buzzed loudly. And the thick limb gave way. I watched in horror as the massive branch snapped and plummeted toward the ground. My eyes followed its descent. But I couldn't react fast enough. The branch crashed with a sickening thud, directly onto my Lamborghini. Which was parked just a few feet away in the driveway. Time seemed to slow as I took in the damage. The branch had hit the car squarely on the roof. Crumpling the metal. Shattering the windows. And leaving a deep dent in the hood. My beautiful, prized Lamborghini, worth $500,000, was now a twisted, broken shell of what it once was. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. This wasn't just an accident, it was the result of Karen's reckless, self-righteous interference. Karen stood there, watching the chaos unfold. But she didn't seem nearly as concerned as she should have been. In fact, she didn't even apologize. Well, Michael, she said with a shrug. Looks like it's going to need a new roof anyway. The tree. I mean, my blood boiled as I took in the damage. She had crossed a line. And it wasn't just the car she'd destroyed, it was my trust in the neighborhood's safety and integrity. Furious, I whipped out my phone. Snapping pictures of the damage. This wasn't just about the tree anymore, it was about holding Karen accountable for what she had done. My Lamborghini was ruined. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I dialed 911. This was no longer just a neighborhood dispute, it was a crime. The sound of the branch hitting the car was deafening. Like a sudden explosion of wood and metal. I stood frozen for a moment. Staring at my Lamborghini. Now a mangled mess of shattered glass and twisted metal. The sleek, polished exterior that had once gleamed under the sun was now covered in deep scratches and dents. The roof crushed under the weight of the fallen branch. My heart sank as I took in the scene, the car that I had worked so hard for. The symbol of all my efforts and achievements. Now rendered practically unrecognizable. I stepped forward. Barely able to process the damage. My pulse pounding in my ears. The once pristine paint job was now marred with deep gouges where the tree branch had scraped across the surface. and the windows were shattered, the jagged pieces glinting dangerously in the sunlight. The roof, my beloved car's roof, was caved in. The sleek lines of the Lamborghini now a distorted memory of what it had been. The cost to repair it would be astronomical. And even if it could be fixed, it would never be the same. I felt a surge of rage flood through me. Karen had not only violated my personal space by trespassing on my property, but she had now destroyed one of my most valuable possessions. It was like she had taken a part of my life and crushed it under that fallen branch. With no regard for what it meant to me or the hard work that had gone into acquiring it. Turning to her, my voice barely contained, I shouted, "This is on you. Karen? Do you have any idea what you've done?" But Karen, as usual, didn't seem to grasp the gravity of the situation. She didn't apologize or show any remorse. Instead, she stood there, arms crossed, looking almost smug. "It's just a car, Michael. You can fix it, right?" The tree needed to come down anyway. I could feel my blood boiling. "It's not just a car, Karen. It's my property. And you had no right to come onto my land and destroy it like this." The anger I had been holding back for so long finally erupted. "You have no idea what you're doing, do you? You just walk around making decisions for everyone. And look what's happened. You've wrecked my Lamborghini." She shrugged, unfazed by my fury. "Well, it was in the way," she muttered, her voice filled with a sense of entitlement, as though the destruction of my car was somehow justified. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed back into my house, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone. There was no way I was letting her get away with this. I took several pictures of the damage from different angles, making sure I had solid evidence. The cost to repair the car, the emotional toll of seeing something I valued destroyed, it wasn't something I was going to let slide. I dialed 911. My voice was steady, but the fury simmering beneath the surface was undeniable. "I need the police here right away. A woman has trespassed on my property and destroyed my car. I'm filing a report for destruction of property." As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I felt a sick sense of injustice. Karen had overstepped her boundaries yet again. And this time, there would be consequences. My Lamborghini wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of my hard work, my dedication, and my achievements. And Karen had taken that away from me in an instant. The moments following Karen's reckless destruction of my Lamborghini were a blur of adrenaline and disbelief. My mind raced as I stepped back, trying to process the surreal scene. My heart still thudded in my chest. But I knew I couldn't let Karen get away with this. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed 911. My voice steady but tinged with fury. "I need the police here immediately," I said, trying to keep my tone controlled, despite the anger boiling within me. "A woman has entered my property without permission and destroyed my car. She's trespassing and has caused significant damage. I need a report filed." The dispatcher took down my details quickly, assuring me that officers would be dispatched right away. As I hung up, I couldn't help but glance over at Karen, who stood in the yard, still unmoved by the mess she had caused. In fact, she seemed almost irritated by my response. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the otherwise quiet neighborhood. 3 squad cars rolled up to the curb, lights flashing in the early afternoon light. I met them at the driveway, pointed at Karen standing near the wreckage of my car, and immediately began explaining the situation. One of the officers turned to Karen. His tone firm, but professional. "Ma'am. We need you to step over here," he said, motioning toward him. Karen, who had previously been all too eager to stand her ground, finally looked nervous. She hesitated for a moment but complied. Walking slowly toward the officer, her face flushed with frustration, I stood back, watching as the officers assessed the damage to my Lamborghini. Their eyes widened as they took in the extent of the destruction. The deep dents, shattered windows, and the caved-in roof told the story far more clearly than I could. The officer then turned his attention to Karen. His voice stern as he asked, "What happened here?" Karen immediately started her defense, raising her hands in an exaggerated gesture of innocence. "It was an accident," she said, her voice high-pitched. "I was just trying to take care of the tree. You know? For the neighborhood's safety. The branch fell on its own. I didn't mean to damage his car." But the more she spoke, the more ridiculous her claim sounded. There was no way the branch fell on its own without her cutting it down first. And it was impossible to ignore the fact that she had entered my yard without permission, carrying a chainsaw, and actively hacking away at the tree. It didn't take a detective to see that her actions were both reckless and deliberate. I crossed my arms, my voice firm as I said, "She trespassed on my property, damaged my car, and is now trying to cover it up with a ridiculous excuse. This is no accident. She had no right to be here. And the damage to my Lamborghini is her responsibility." The officer nodded in agreement. "We've got enough evidence to move forward with charges," he said, his gaze shifting between Karen and the car. "You're being arrested for trespassing and destruction of property." Karen's face went pale at the mention of arrest. She opened her mouth, no doubt ready to protest. But the officers weren't having it. "Ma'am, please turn around," one of them said. "You're under arrest." She was in complete shock now, her arms shaking as she was cuffed and escorted to the patrol car. Her mouth worked silently as she tried to comprehend what was happening. The humiliation of being arrested in front of the neighborhood was too much for her to handle. And I could see the fury building up inside her. As she was driven away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, it was about making sure that her actions had consequences. No one should be allowed to act like a dictator in a neighborhood and destroy another person's property without facing repercussions. As the police took their statements and filed the reports, it became clear that Karen was in deep trouble. The evidence was undeniable. Between my photographs, the officer's observations, and Karen's history of disruptive behavior, there was no doubt that she was responsible for the destruction of my Lamborghini. She had no legal right to enter my property and no excuse for the damage she caused. And now, the law would make sure she paid for it. The court date finally arrived. And by then, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. Karen's actions had made headlines in the local news, and the residents of Maple Estates had been watching the drama unfold from the sidelines. It was clear to everyone that Karen had crossed a line that no amount of power or self-appointed authority could excuse. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Karen sat across from me, her once confident demeanor now replaced by a mix of frustration and fear. Her defense attorney tried to argue that the damage to my Lamborghini was a result of unfortunate circumstances and that Karen's intentions were for the greater good of the neighborhood. But no one was buying it. The evidence was undeniable. Karen had entered my property without permission, wielded a chainsaw recklessly, and caused irreversible damage to one of my most prized possessions. As I sat on the witness stand, recounting the events of that day, the look in Karen's eyes told me everything I needed to know. She knew she was about to lose. My attorney presented photos of the damage to the Lamborghini, alongside the police reports and my statement. The facts were crystal clear. The judge listened patiently, his expression serious. Before turning to Karen's attorney, given the clear evidence presented, the judge said, "The defendant is hereby ordered to pay $500,000 in damages to the plaintiff to cover the full cost of the Lamborghini." Karen's face went white as the words sank in. $500,000. The amount was staggering. But it wasn't just the financial blow that would affect her, it was the damage to her reputation. The once untouchable HOA enforcer, the woman who thought she could rule the neighborhood, had fallen hard from grace. It wasn't just me who had been impacted by her reckless actions. The HOA board, deeply embarrassed by her behavior, had already begun to take action behind the scenes. Karen had alienated so many people with her tyrannical ways that it was impossible for her to hold any kind of position within the community. At the next HOA meeting, a unanimous vote was held to strip Karen of her membership and any further authority within the association. She had completely disgraced herself, and the neighbors who had once feared her now stood united against her. Even Karen's loyal supporters, a dwindling group of like-minded individuals, had distanced themselves from her. The neighborhood had seen the light. They no longer feared her or her fake rules. They had witnessed the consequences of her selfishness and disregard for others. Karen was forced to leave Maple Estates, with her reputation in tatters and her finances crumbling under the weight of the court order. She had no choice but to sell her house. The for sale sign went up almost immediately, marking the end of her reign over the neighborhood. As I watched her drive away, leaving Maple Estates for good, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. The damage to my Lamborghini was, of course, irreparable. But I had fought back and won. Karen had been held accountable for her actions, and the community I loved had been restored to its peaceful, cooperative state. I stood in my driveway, the memories of the past few months flooding back. The ordeal had been exhausting, but I had come out the other side stronger. And my beloved Lamborghini, though forever scarred, was a reminder of the lessons learned. And as for Karen, she had learned the hard way that no one, no matter how powerful they think they are, can escape the consequences of their actions forever. The nightmare was over, and my neighborhood was finally at peace.